I got to where I could identify them all just by the sound of the engine. Under the hood, all you can see is instruments, and you're doing instrument takeoff. Oh, and wow. Keeping that baby straight took a lot of right rudder. Well, later I'd fly the F-8, and I always wondered, I wonder if any of my parts are in this airplane. I'm not sure I want to fly it. Had some interesting experiences in that airplane and many others. We had a colonel come back from Vietnam and tell us that one of his snipers had picked off 300 people one night with one of those things.
One night?
One night. I climbed out toward Cleburne and got to 35,000 feet, rolled it on its back, pulled it straight down, full power, watched the Mach meter. Got it to 1.05. That's about all it would do, I guess.
Really?
In a vertical dive.
Wow.
So I'd broken the Mach for the first time in my life. But I remember one evening taking off and just see how fast I get to 40,000 feet. From the time I released my brakes, it was afterburner climb all the way at a 50-degree angle at 0.95 Mach. About 2.5 minutes to 40,000 feet.
Really?
Yeah. The sun had set, and I brought it up to quite a high.
Wow.
Here he comes running out from the crowd line, waving his clipboard at me. I thought, oh man, I'm gonna get a violation. And I cracked the canopy open. He's real gruff guy. What was the ceiling up there? I said, about 1,000 feet, Jerry. He says, great, the Blue Angels can fly.
Basically, just kind of lead into it just by your name, what branch of the military you're in.
My name, Jose Jimenez.
That's great.
I'm the fastest kid in all of Dallas. I don't fly no airplane if it don't go 200 miles an hour and turn upside down.
I used to take a blast before you take off.
And I need a taco for extra boost.
If I do an outtake section, we'll put that in there.
When I guess my first inspiration on flying, I lived over in South Dallas, not far from Love Field, about 3 miles from Love Field. And during World War II, all the airplanes that were ferrying through, getting gas at Love Field, would take most of the time to the south and come right over our house. And so I got fascinated by that. Even before that, I saw a little Piper Cub came over, I guess, yellow. It was yellow. That's the one thing I recall, because I was more than 4 or 5 years old. And it did a loop. And I looked at that, and from then on, every time I'd hear an airplane, I'd run out to see if it was going to do a loop. And none ever did. They just would fly over. But when the war started, I was 7 years old, and so I got very interested in the war. And I got to where I could identify every airplane, period. It didn't matter what it was. I made models and drew pictures and went to a little Catholic school on Swiss Avenue in Dallas, which is even closer to Love Field. And again, right in the flight path. So during school hours, these fighters and bombers would be coming right over, I'm sitting there, I'm going crazy. And I got to where I could identify them all just by the sound of the engine. And even separating things out like the P-40 and the P-51 they're quite close. And radial engine airplanes sound quite a bit alike, so you have to really pay attention to be able to sort out which ones are which. We got pretty good at it. I remember after the war, I don't remember exactly what year, maybe 46, 47, I heard a sound, and I said, I know what that is. That's a B-36.
Oh, wow.
I'd never heard one, but it was such an unusual sound. There was nothing, I just went through elimination. There's nothing else it could be but a B-36, and I dashed out of the school outside in the yard, and sure enough, he was flying right over Dallas at about 1,000 feet, showing off. It was early in the the B-36 phase. And they didn't go out of service, I guess, until the 50s sometimes. But they were built over here in Fort Worth, and we see them quite often. Always at the rail. Of course, P-51s and P-25s were very common, and lots of great airplanes. There's a photograph at the museum at Love Field it's an aerial photograph of Love Field, taken somewhere during the war. And you can identify about 50 B-17s and about 50 P-38s, and then one or two of almost everything else in that one photograph. Quite a great photograph. When the war ended, I was 11 years old, and my mother was a great person. She took me out to an open house at Love Field. They had opened up the base for everybody to come in. And there was a P-80 Shooting Star there. Well, that cemented it, man. I walked around that airplane so many times, and it didn't fly or anything, didn't run. It just sat there, a static display. But I'd never seen a jet before. Of course, knew about them. And I got into building models of the P-80 and drawing pictures of it. And 9 years later, I was flying one. It was called a T-33, or in the Navy, it was called maybe a TV-2. Maybe it was called a TV-2. But it was basically a T-33, and that was down at Corpus Christi, the first jet, introduction into jets. Of course, it's so easy to fly compared to prop planes. I'd gotten through all my training in SNJs, and then did an instrument phase in T-28s, and then you move to the jet. It's dead simple. You know, we've been doing under-the-bag instrument takeoffs in the T-28. Well, it's a 1,400 horsepower engine on thing, lots of torque, and to keep that thing going straight down the runway under the hood, all you can see is instruments, and you're doing instrument takeoff. And keeping that baby straight took a lot of right rudder. And I know we could do it. And of course, T-33, once you're lined up on the runway, you add the power, nothing really happens. It starts creeping forward and slowly picks up speed, stays straight as an arrow right down the line, and just so easy. We did a little bit of instrument in the T-33, not a whole lot. We may have done 15 hours of instrument training in the T-33, something like that, and did some solo flying in the T-33 briefly, and then we moved to the little F-9F Panther, which was a tiny little airplane, but very nice little airplane. I didn't fit in it very well. I sit kind of tall, and first time I got in one, the instructor was next to another airplane. We got fired up and went to close the canopy, hit me around the back of the head. Uh-oh. Problem with the parachute. So I called the instructor and said, I'm going to shut down and see what's going on here. Pulled the parachute out and said, I need a new parachute. This one's not right. Well, they brought another one that was exactly the same. They weren't happy about having to do it either. And so I got in there and I realized I'm about to be an ex-jet pilot. And so I scooted way down like this, loosened the straps up, scooted way down, put my head down, I closed the canopy, and then I kind of halfway straightened up. But I had to keep my head from being right against the glass. I had to stay slouched.
I'll be darned.
And so I had a plan. If I had to bail out of the thing, step one, I was going to blow the canopy off. Step two, I was going to straighten up, and then step three, pull the curtain. It all worked out in my mind. I could in about 2 seconds. It had a 1 second delay because it had an automatic system. You pull the curtain, it blows the canopy, and out you go. One step. So you add in that step of pulling the canopy release. It takes a little bit longer, but
yeah,
I decided that was worth it. And then when I finally got assigned on active duty, I went over to Brunswick, Georgia, a place called Naval Air Station Glencoe, and it's now a Secret Service training base. But at that time, it had been a major blimp training base. They had 12 blimps on the base with 2 of these giant, humongous hangars. I mean, they were unbelievably big. You put 6 blimps into one hangar, you know how big it has to be.
Wow.
They were far larger than the Blockbuster blimp. These were load-carrying blimps. They were the real thing. But we had Banshees. We had 40 Banshees, F-2H-1s and F-2H-2s that were just back from Korea. And Korean War had just ended at that point, and we had with a few 600-mile-an-hour tape over bullet holes and things. Same was true of the Panthers down at advanced training. They'd just come back from Vietnam, F-9, F-2s. We had F-2H-1s and 2s. The ones had no tip tank on them. They were the original Banshee.
Oh, wow.
And just one step ahead of what was called the Phantom, the FH Phantom, which was McDonnell's first venture into a carrier fighter, twin-engine carrier fighter. And then the little Banshee came along, and it had 2 engines. Then there was the Banshee 2. It was a bit bigger and had tip tanks and quite a bit more fuel. Mm-hmm. And then the 3s and the 4s came along, and they had the extended fuselage, and they were really great night fighters as well as day fighters, and they served well. for quite a long while. But the 1s and 2s were very nimble, and we had a great time. We were training controllers for the CIC rooms, the Combat Information Center. They have air controllers with radar and that. So we had a complete setup. We had a building that had, I don't know, maybe 20 stations of radar, and big radar, and the big status boards and everything, and just like being on a ship. And then the airplanes, they would take us out over the Atlantic, and we would be at 1,000-foot intervals from 29,000 to 41,000. And we'd have one spot vacant in the middle, and that's where the bogey ran.
Oh, okay.
So they had a bogey that they run 2 bogeys, one in each way, and we'd have 2 stacks of fighters at each end, and we'd have these, I don't know, 15 or 20 controllers running all these airplanes, and it was it was really fun. And for the first 2 or 3 times, it was great. But then for 3 years of that, and you go up there and sit there for 3 hours at 40,000 feet, turn to a heading of 360, Roger, 360. Turn to a heading of 270, Roger, 270. Bogey, 1 o'clock, 2 miles, Roger, got him in sight. Turn left and fall in behind the bogey, etc. You know, we were fighting early World War II in 1956 and 57 with our approach to it. We assumed the bogey was going to just stay straight, and we were going to come in and make an intercept on the guy and get behind him in position to launch a rocket up his backside.
Yeah.
But I guess it was intended to be night interdiction. You know, in Korea, they had the problem with the guys coming at night and keeping everybody awake at night, dropping enough bombs to keep people awake. Because all was far. It was just to harass. And they finally got some airplanes up and began to shoot them down. But they had one airplane that I heard about was the Russian biplane, that big Antonov biplane.
Antonov, yeah.
Very slow. Flies
AN-2,
70, 80 miles an hour. And those guys were coming in and dropping bombs. And we didn't, our jets, no way our jets are going to get them. They were low and they were very, very slow. So some enterprising Navy guy said, hey, let me take a Corsair. I'll put the gear and the flaps down, and I'll find these guys. I'll find you get me close, and I'll see their exhaust. And in fact, he shot 5 of them down, and that stopped it.
Are you serious? No kidding.
He became an ace shooting down Antonov biplanes.
The Corsair flying dirty.
That's one of the great stories of the
I've
Korean
never heard
War.
that before.
That's a great
great
story. There's a lot of good stories that came out of the Korean War, and if you
Yeah.
ever want to see a good film, see the Bridges at Tokari. That
is a good
pretty
one.
close to
Yes.
reality, the way things really were. And a very good friend of mine flew the plane that William Holden was supposedly flying.
Oh, really?
He got several weeks of detached duty to help make that film, and so they
cool.
cooperated with the Navy. Much more recently, Top Gun the Navy cooperated with, and another great one the movie made regarding the Navy. In fact, I think the best one was a fantasy, Final Countdown. Kirk Douglas. If you've not seen it, it's really worth. It's a great movie. It's fantasy. The
Time travel.
Yeah, time travel. The Kitty Hawk, I think, carrier.
I think you're right. Yeah.
It's either that or the Nimitz. The Kitty Hawk or the Nimitz. They go through a time warp and end up off Hawaii on December the 6th, 1941. And here they got this incredible nuclear firepower aboard this thing, F-14 Tomcats. And they hear what's going on with respect to the Japanese Navy, because they got great communication intercepts, and they hear Hawaii, nothing's going on, and they have to decide what to do. Are they going to change history? Good film.
Yeah, it is.
I think Martin Sheen's in it, and
yes, yeah, it is.
I forget all the players, but but the thing about that film, you will never see better carrier operations in a film. Even a documentary won't be as good as that film was, because they got great cooperation in the Navy. They had incredible cinematographers, and they just got wonderful film. I think Clay Lacey, by the way, did the air-to-air stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the Tomcat guys were talking about all they're going to do and everything, and he says, look, guys, here's the deal. You come up behind the leer, and when I tell you to brake, you brake hard. And you've got a box back there about 300 feet wide and about 100 feet tall. And if you're not in that box, you're not going to be in the movie. I said, don't worry, we'll add the sound and the story, and it'll seem exciting.
Right.
And in fact, that was out of Top Gun, I guess, Tom Cruise. But
yeah.
And I think the same rules applied to as well to the Final Countdown. How do you get air-to-air footage? Now there was one scene in the Final Countdown, very interesting, where the Tomcats are chasing the Zeros down close to the water, and the guy almost loses it, and he kicked up a little rooster tail behind his F-14.
Really?
And they thought he was lost.
Really?
Whew, that was close. Scared everybody.
Wow.
And including the pilot.
Yeah, no kidding.
he got too low and too slow, and too steep of an angle, and trying to recover. Jet's got a lot of inertia. It doesn't just recover immediately.
It's a heavy airplane.
Things can happen. When I left high school, I didn't have any money. My family didn't have any money. I needed to go to college, but I didn't know what to do, and the guidance counselor was really not with it. And I ended up out at Arlington, which turned out very well, but I took a thing called Industrial Mechanical Engineering, which was a 2-year program, not leading toward a degree. It was a 2-year terminal program. And in that program, there was a couple of other guys in there that were leaving after my first year to go into the Navy. And when I was in high school, I'd seen a Navy recruiting film about Pensacola, and very interested in that. It really looked really cool. And I remember when I was a kid during the war, the poor guys in the Air Force, they were over in North Africa, and they're living in these awful tents and dirt blowing and everything, and what a mess. And then I saw the men of the Fighting Lady, and all these guys are on this beautiful ship, and when they get back from a mission, they've got a great meal, steak, and everything is cool, and a shower and the whole bit. I thought, this is pretty simple. I think I'll go Navy. But I was at Arlington, and I was getting ready to graduate after the 2-year program, and I had a night job at a machine shop in Grand Prairie, and of all things, I was working at night unsupervised on a milling machine. I was a pretty good machinist, making parts for the prototypes of the F-8 Crusader.
For the prototypes?
And here's an 18, 19-year-old unsupervised guy working at night making parts for the F-8 Crusader, starting with a block of aluminum and milling to a blueprint. Well, later I'd fly the F-8, and I always wondered, I wonder if any of my parts are in this airplane. I'm not sure I want to fly it.
Right.
But at any rate, there was a great observation point. The railroad tracks there just north of Jefferson Avenue, right off the end of the runway at Navy Dallas. And I would sit there off and on and watch the airplanes. And one day, shortly before I graduated, late May, I came to the railroad tracks, and the jets were taking off, and they had Cougars at that time, F-9, F-6s, I believe they were, or 7. And boy, that looks like fun. I think I'll go down the main gate and get a little information on this Navy flight program. I got down there, and the arms of the Navy pulled me in like that. A month later, I was in Pensacola.
Really?
Now, I had never been in an airplane in my life. I'd never flown. I'd built a lot of models and drawn a lot of pictures and watched a lot of airplanes, but I'd never been to an air show, and I'd never been in an airplane. Well, 16 weeks of hell in Pensacola. They really beat you up good. I arrived, and I had my golf clubs in the back of my car. I had a pretty nice car. And I drove up in front of the check-in place, and I went in, and there's this Marine Master Sergeant sitting there. And I explained who I was. Well, he got huffy, and he had me down doing push-ups. Then he had me marching up and down the hall. I said, well, I was just going to check in. I'm a day early. I was going to play golf. He says, son, you're checked in. Get that car down to the parking lot. I said, what parking lot? He says, that parking lot. I don't see one. It was about a mile away.
Oh my God.
He says, I want you to double time all the way back here. So I parked the car, and here I came puffing and panting. And he had a mop and a bucket ready for me, and I was scrubbing floors with a mop and a bucket.
Thank God you were early.
And well, then other guys started showing up, and what turned out to be my roommates over the next 24 hours. And one of the great challenges we had was spit shining our boots, which were rough leather. You had to really work to get them to go. And then they gave us, the military brass buckles. Mm-hmm. Well, these were black. They'd been dip painted in black, and that's what the sailors wore with their white uniforms. Okay. It was the black buckle. And the officers wore the brass buckle.
Okay, yeah.
And they gave us a blitz cloth, which is a device for cleaning brass. And they said, by X amount of time, I forget, we had 2 or 3 days, that black buckle has to be brass inside and out. And the only two we had, if there's a scratch on it, you're in big trouble. We did it.
Are you serious?
We did it. And we had to learn how to make a bed to Navy specs, so a quarter will jump on it. And I remember going into the barber shop that Monday after we got there on the weekend, and the guy says, "How do you like your hair?" And I said, "Well, I keep a little bit of ducktails and stuff." And he says, "Great." And he takes the thing and he goes right down the middle of my head to the scalp, and he says, "Now," he says, "do you still want your ducktails, or do you want the rest of it to look like this?" All the time he's shaving off the hair, and you end up absolutely bald, and they keep you that way for 16 weeks of pre-flight. And you do a lot of running, and you do a lot of calisthenics, and you do a lot of the order arms, present arms, carrying M1 rifle everywhere you go, and running most of the time with that M1 rifle. Half a day of that, half a day of bookwork. And it was a great day to graduate. We went then from, that was at the main base there at Pensacola, NAS Pensacola. And Chevalier Field was there at that time. It's gone now, but it was a little, they called it a mat. It had runways that ran any direction at all, and based on the direction of the wind, that's the way the little biplanes would take off in the old days. Well, we weren't that far past that. And the Blue Angels came, and they performed there. And that's the first time I'd seen an air show, and I was very impressed. I had wanted to be a bomber pilot and dive bomber. That was always what I wanted to be. I don't know why, that's just what I had in my mind. So I ended up finally leaving there and going to Whiting Field. Whiting was one of the very earliest of the naval aviators who functioned in France during World War I, when the Navy first got cranked up at all in World War I. They actually started in 1911, and they got into the war in 1917 or so, 16, 17. And there's a great book, by the way, called The Millionaires Unit that gets in depth into that.
Really?
Yeah, it's a great book, and tells you all the history. But anyway, we went to Whiting Field, and there was the North and South Whiting, hundreds of yellow SNJs. Some people say T6, Texan in any case. And we learned how to fly. And it was a great thrill. I remember the first flight, my first time in an airplane, I got sick.
Really?
And I got sick on the second flight, and I got sick on the third flight.
Wow.
And I finally said, I told the instructor, maybe if you'd let me fly a little bit more, and he was just back from Korea, fighter pilot, and he was going to show me all he could do, and he did. But if you let me fly a little more, you fly a little less, maybe I can get past this. And thank God he decided to do that, because he could have just washed me out of the program at that point. But they really weren't washing people out for that kind of thing at that time. They did later. But anyway, I got past it, and we did basic and primary there, and acrobatics and one thing and another. And they wanted to teach you acrobatics before you soloed, because they knew when you went out there by yourself, you're probably going to do some acrobatics. They didn't want you to kill yourself.
Sure.
So that was early on the list, slow rolls and loops and Cuban 8s and spins and things like that. And it was pretty neat. The airplane's a good airplane. It was a very powerful airplane, a tail dragger. And learning to fly in that big an airplane with that much horsepower could be a challenge. At the time, we just accepted it and thought it was, what are we doing playing with this terrible little airplane? I want a jet. And then we went to a field called Softly, and we learned to fly formation, and 6 aircraft, 6-ship formation. You talk about extreme. When you get into echelon and you're 6 airplanes down that string, and you can hear them come over the field to land, to break, trying to keep in place. And a lot of mid-air collisions back at that time. They lost quite a few people that way. And then we went to a field called Barron, which is closer to the Gulf, called Bloody Barron because so many people crashed there. It was gunnery, bombing, and carrier qual, and it was a lot of fun. I had 3 friends that crashed. They all survived, by the way.
Oh wow!
But 2 of them were my roommates in pre-flight that crashed, and there were others. I mean, it was a pretty steady diet of airplanes being torn up. At Corey Field, we did some night flying, and that was wasn't our first bit of night flying. But it was our first bit of night instrument flying, and we did a bit of instrument flying. And back in those days, instrument flying, there was no Omni or TAC-in or GPS. You did dead reckoning for the most part, which is time and distance and speed and allowing for the wind. navigation. And then we had a thing called the Adcock Range. And the Adcock Range was a radio station that had 4 antennas, and it put out lobes of signal. And 2 of the lobes would be putting out the Morse code signal A, da, and the other 2 lobes, da. And kind of hard to tell apart actually, but you could. And then when you got exactly on the seam between 2 of the lobes, it would null out. The A's and the N's would melt together to make just a solid sound. And that was called on the beam. If you ever heard the terminology on the beam, that goes back to the Adcock Range.
I'll be darned.
And
I never knew that.
Then you had to orient to find out which leg of the beam you're on, and there was a process of turns that you could discriminate which leg you were on. And then you flew that beam, and if the signal got weaker, you're going away, do a teardrop, turn around, come back, and as it got stronger, you know you're on the right track. And then you cross over the station, and right over the station there was no signal, and it would just go dead quiet. So you knew you had a station passage. It was really an interesting form of.
Now, was this a sound in the headset?
In the
headset. Okay. I'll be darned.
And there was a very primitive form of navigation that worked, and people got where they were going doing that. Thankfully, not too long after that, we got TACAN. And TACAN was a great thing, although I guess I didn't get TACAN until I was in the reserves. And most of the rest of what we did was, in the Banshees, we had a beacon direction finder, automatic direction finder, ADF. And you could tune in radio stations and beacons and things and navigate. Again, dead reckoning was important, getting your compass course set right and knowing your speed and time and looking for your checkpoints and know which radio to tune in. And again, when the needle flips, you know you've passed. I traveled all over the country that way in the Banshee and had a great time in it. Had some interesting experiences in that airplane and many others. We got out and came in the reserves, and I was 23 years old with a wife and 2 kids and no money. And I managed to get a job at Texas Instruments, a company I'd never heard of until a friend of a friend of a friend mentioned it, and got into the semiconductor world and stayed in it. I really enjoyed it. I'm a high-tech person. I love technology, love engineering, physics. And I went back to school at that point, a night school back at Arlington. And it had become a 4-year school. While I was on active duty, it went from being 2-year status to 4-year status. Still part of Texas A&M. Got my degree in physics and math, primary math, secondary physics. Graduated with high honors, thankfully, and had 3 kids watching me get my diploma at that point. And I was working full-time at TI, and then went to a company in Garland called Vero in 1960 to help them build night scopes. They were building the original sniper scopes for the Army. The first contract had been let since the war, and it was the old infrared type. It had a spotlight on top, and when you looked through it, you would see what it illuminated. Then later we went to a image intensifier system that used just starlight and amplified ambient light, and quite unbelievable kind of stuff. It operated extremely high voltage. The sniper scope at 15,000 volts, and the image intensifier at 45,000 volts.
Wow.
And my role over there was to build the high voltage devices that got you from 6 volts of battery to 45,000 volts. It was an interesting project, and I really enjoyed that. And I remember once we were down at Lakeway for I was a member of a group called YPO, Young Presidents Organization, and I took one of the starlight scopes down there and set it up on a tripod so people could look through it. And John Connolly was there, who was then governor, as I recall, and Henry Kissinger was there. And they looked through it. Well, when Connolly looked through it, he looked in there, and we had it pointed about 300 yards out to some trees and things. And he'd look in it, he says, "You turn that light off and on." I said, no, there's no light. This is the scope, that's what it does. You can see in the dark. And,
wow.
We had a colonel come back from Vietnam and tell us that one of his snipers had picked off 300 people one night with one of those things.
One night?
One night. He was shooting from 400 or 500 yards away, and had noise and flash suppression, and they never found him. He just kept banging away on the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
300 PO. Vietnam?
Vietnam, yeah.
Wow.
There's one of the books that Clancy wrote dealt with the starlight scope. It was the one of the South American drug king, as I recall. At any rate, they're very popular, and you can buy them now. In fact, the Russians started selling them commercially here before any of the American companies could.
Really?
Because ours were classified.
Right.
Interesting sidelight, somewhere in the 70s, 73, I guess, there was a big war in the Sinai between Egypt and Israel, and Egypt got the upper hand for quite a while, and the Israelis eventually beat them back. But what they found out is the Egyptians had Russian starlight scopes, and the Israelis really didn't have that capability, and that was a great boon for our business out in Garland, because all of a sudden they wanted to buy a ton of starlight scopes, and we were producing them like fury at that point. I left that company in '78. I became eventually president of Aero, and the chairman and I really didn't quite get along, and so eventually he decided I was out the door. And so I started my own company in '79, and the rest is history. As they say, it turned out to be an extraordinarily good thing he did for me, forcing me out of my own. Throughout my early times there, I continued flying in the reserves out at Navy Dallas. Got to fly the Cougar, the F9, F6 Cougar, the FJ3M Fury, which very much like an F86, and then the FJ4B, which has a similar appearance, but is a very different aircraft. It had very thin wings, had a much larger engine, 8,000-pound thrust engine in it, and a razor back shape, very, very refined aerodynamics. And it would cruise, no afterburner, but it would cruise at 100% power, and which you could run. It would cruise at about 0.96 Mach.
Oh.
And you just tip the nose a little bit in a supersonic. So it was interesting, but when I first got in the reserves, they were getting rid of the Cougar, and they only have a few more months, but I convinced them that I'd flown the Panther, and I had a lot of time in Banshee, and I really could fly the Cougar. Let me fly. So they did. And I got checked out in, even though it just had a short life. And I got 2 chase flights. Still a good friend, John Campbell, was my chase pilot. We went out and did all the things you do for checking out an airplane. My 3rd flight was solo. And I climbed out toward Cleburne and got to 35,000 feet, rolled it on its back, pulled it straight down, full power, watched the Mach meter. Got it to 1.05. That's about all it would do, I guess,
really? In
a vertical dive.
Wow.
So I'd broken the Mach for the first time in my life. Of course, we got the Crusader later. We got in 62 or 3, we got the Crusader, the F-8 Crusader, and it would go up to Mach 1.7 in level flight. It was really a rocket ship. I can remember we had the F-8U-1s, which were very lightweight, didn't have all the stuff on them yet. The 2s, the 2NEs had lots of electronics and things. We had almost nothing on it. It'd carry a couple of sidewinders, and that's about it.
Wow.
But I remember one evening taking off and just see how fast I get to 40,000 feet. From the time I released my brakes, it was afterburner climb all the way at a 50-degree angle at 0.95 Mach, about 2.5 minutes to 40,000 feet.
Really?
Yeah. The sun had set, and I brought it up to quite a high.
Wow.
That was a fun experience. And then once taking off, I flew a lot at night because I had worked full time and was going to school and one thing and another. And so I got my time in by going out and flying at night. And one night I was taking off out of Navy Dallas at sunset, and there was a balloon. They used to launch them down here in East Texas, Palestine, the big research balloons. And I saw it, and I called the radar guy. I said, "We've got a big balloon out here. I think it's over Grand Prairie." And as I climbed out, "No, I think it's over Arlington." "No, it's further than that." Well, it was almost Abilene. Wow. And I got up to 45,000 feet, and it was still way above me, and I finally got to it. I'm going to see just how close I can get to it. Well, I pitched up, and I ended up at 55,000, and then came on back down, but didn't get close. It had to be over 100,000 feet.
Wow.
So it was, they quit doing that. There was a lot of atmospheric research going on at that time, and I don't know all the things they were measuring. Part of it was to measure the radioactivity in the air as a result of airborne atomic bomb tests.
Oh, okay.
Because there have been a lot of those.
Yeah.
In fact, in atomic bomb testing, there was a test in Mississippi. Did you know they set off an atomic bomb in Mississippi?
No, I didn't.
Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
Really?
About 30 miles from Hattiesburg in a salt dome. They drilled into a salt dome and put a 5 kiloton bomb and set it off.
Oh, I did. Yes, I heard.
And what they wanted, it was in '64, and what they wanted to do was to determine the seismic signature of a salt dome bomb, because salt is not like rock. Salt is a fluid, and it moves. It's soft. It absorbs, and they wanted to see what that looked like on a seismograph, so that they could detect whether the Russians were doing. That's when they made the test ban treaties, and they determine whether they were doing illicit underground tests in salt domes, because that would cloak the seismic effects of a bomb. And then they put, I think, like 20,000 tons of TNT down there and set that off after the nuclear bomb to see what a non-nuclear signature would look like.
Right.
Do you know there's 550 salt domes in the United States?
No.
Amazing number.
I had no idea.
That's how many are cataloged.
What was it like making your first carrier landings?
Well, I don't have much carrier experience. I got 6 landings in an SNJ, and that was it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, other than simulators and arrested landings out here at Navy Dallas. Because I was assigned to a shore squadron, the CIC thing, and then reserves, and we didn't go aboard ship. In fact, one of the reasons I got reserves is we were scheduled in the Crusader to go aboard a ship. And we were going to do 2 weeks active duty doing land carrier qual preparation, and then 2 weeks on a ship right over the end of the fiscal year. 2 weeks in this fiscal year, 2 weeks in that fiscal year. It was during Vietnam. And right at the last minute, the Chief of Naval Operations decided he didn't want reservists aboard the ships. Okay, am I just a Boy Scout? I come out here and do Saturday morning inspection in all my dress clothes at 7 o'clock. And I go down to fly, and they got maybe 3 or 4 airplanes that are flyable out of 20 because we don't have enough parts. They've robbed us of parts, they've robbed us of mechanics, and here we sit being Boy Scouts. This is nonsense. Well, then I started graduate school, and once I started graduate school, I said, I just can't do this. I can't work full time, go to graduate school, take care of my family, and do this. And so I dropped out of the reserves at that time. I thought about going back several times, and I never got around to it. Is what it boiled down to. Mm-hmm. And then much later, 1976, 12 years later, 10 years later, I was on the board of directors of the American Electronics Association in Palo Alto, California, and was riding back and forth on American Airlines to California quite a bit, and doing some selling out there too as well. And one of the magazines had an ad for the Confederate Air Force Air Show in Harlingen, Texas. That was a big ad, a little bitty ad. Golly, that looks interesting. World War II stuff. Never heard of it before. And so I convinced my wife and one of my daughters to drive down, and we drove down to Harlingen and visited Mexico at that time. There was no hazard in going to Mexico. No big hazard going to Mexico. Today I would not do it.
Right.
But we over and we had dinner at the drive-in and all that kind of stuff. And I had already been there some because we had a factory down there in the late 60s that I was responsible for. So I'd been to Matamoros many times and kind of knew the ropes down there. So we went down, and as it turned out, it was a nasty weekend. It was 40 degrees and 40-mile-an-hour wind. It's not very often it happens that way, but it does happen. But we endured it, and they went shopping, and I went to the air show. And I was standing out there, and I said, why am I not doing this? This is crazy. I was thinking about getting into RC flying. I'm a pilot. I can do this. So I came back home, and I dug out. I'd gotten a civilian license while I was in the Navy. I dug it out. I went out to Air Park here in Dallas, found a 19-year-old kid instructor, got checked out in a 152, and started flying again. And then a few months later, I found a decathlon to rent that was acrobatic, and then I bought a decathlon. And then in 1980, I started doing air shows. Actually, a little before that, but officially 1980. First legal air show was 1980.
Legal being the operative word.
And it turned out to be, it was at El Reno, Oklahoma, and it was 115 degrees.
Oh, wow.
Wow, look at it and kill myself. No telling what the density altitude was.
Yeah, no kidding.
But from then on, I decided I want to do air shows. That just was as much fun as anybody could have, and I bought a Pitts in 1984, an S2A, and then I bought an S2B in 1989. Both of those were blue and gold, which great Navy colors and bright Jesuit colors, my high school colors. Here
Oh, cool.
at Dallas High School. And then in 1991, well, actually in 89, got allied with FINA and did a few shows for them in the blue and yellow Pitts, and then we decided to get a Pitts all painted up in FINA colors, which we did in 1991. That airplane now hangs in the museum down in Love Field, the Frontiers Flight Museum. But the little Pitts was a wonderful airplane. I thought it was probably the best airplane ever made. So much fun to fly, to do anything you wanted to do in it. Just absolutely, your mind was the limitation as to what you could conjure to get it to do.
Really?
And you put it on. You wore it just like a fighter plane. You just wore it. It was part of you. You don't have to think about flying it. All you have to think about is doing what you want to do, and the airplane then does it for you.
Wow.
And that went along just fine until 1996. And I was in 95 actually. I was at Oshkosh and flying the Pitts there. And Jim, forget his last name now. Too bad. He was from St. Augustine Aerosport down there that was the distributor for the extra, Jim Moser. And he had an extra 300L. I'd tried out a 300. I couldn't close the canopy by that much. I was too tall. And so I couldn't fly a 300. Guy had one for sale here in Dallas, and I looked at it. It wouldn't fit. And I don't fit any of the little single-seat Pittses and things either for the same reason. It's set too high. Works fine in the S2B because it's got that big canopy. So when Jim had that 300L up at Oshkosh, I said, Jim, if I can get in and close the canopy, I'll buy one. I got in and closed the canopy. Well, it touched my head, but I was in. I said, I'll buy one. So I ordered one shortly thereafter, and the little Northern Lights demo team had 300s, and they were going to go to 300Ls, but as it turned out, the low wing compared to the mid wing, it rolls differently. You get more of a barrel out of the low wing, whereas you get a right on the axis with the mid wing. And so they canceled the order. Well, I stepped in and took their place and got an early delivery in February of '96. And I remember we sent the painting requirements over to Walter Extra in Germany, and he decided that's too complicated. I don't do those kind of complicated paint
Really?
jobs. We said, well, we can send a consultant over to help. Well, that got him. He said, well, we can do this. We can do it. Need no consultant. So once he got it done, he thought it was the prettiest one he'd ever done.
Really?
And it was just gorgeous.
Wow.
Unfortunately, a friend damaged it a couple of years ago, and I ended up buying one kind of off the shelf, which is blue and white, which I love. It's a wonderful airplane, but the red, white, and blue, and with all the FINA stuff on it was unique.
Yes,
and everybody commented
beautiful
on it,
airplane,
and
too.
I loved it. The only thing that shows FINA on the new one is the big symbol on the tail, big FINA shield on the tail. But they fly similarly but differently. You'd think airplanes that came out of the same molds would fly the same way, but when you're dealing with plastic, no two plastic pieces are exactly the same.
Really?
They're close. So I had to kind of learn how to fly the new one. No problem just flying it, if you're just going to go somewhere. But if you're going to do acro and do low altitude acro and do extreme acro, it's slightly different, just slightly different. Had to work out how to do certain maneuvers to get them to come out just right. Snap rolls, Lomshevox, particularly those two, took a little bit of effort to get it just right. And even now, every now and then, Lomshevox doesn't go the way I want it to go. It just don't go, and you can't do anything about it. Once it goes wrong, you can't fix it. You just have to kind of
Ride it out.
live with it and see what happens.
Wow.
That's in fact a good Lomshevox, in my opinion, is a lot of people are doing shoulder rolls now, which are basically a very controlled maneuver. A Lomsjebak is really not a controlled maneuver. It's you throw the airplane, you use the gyroscopic forces you build up in the rotational part of get the airplane rotating fast with a snap roll basically, and then you slam full left forward stick and right rudder, and it flips it. It goes uncontrolled, and it's truly uncontrolled until eventually the nose points down, and then you can take back over and fly it. But it's a wonderful maneuver. They all come out just a hair different. They're not always exact. Now maybe Sean Tucker's always come out just right, but he's flying a Pitts, and a Pitts does a far nicer Lomsjebak than an extra does, in my opinion.
He used to fly the Pitts. Now he's flying the Oracle.
But it's still a Pitts.
Yeah, is it?
Yeah, it's a Pitts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just he's got the fancy wings. Who's the guy that does those wings? Guy in Canada does those wings.
Oh, okay.
But it's basically a Pitts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he and Jim Leroy both flew Pittses, and now Jason Newberg down here at Lancaster is flying Jim Leroy's backup airplane.
Oh, really?
Which, as I recall, was an S1 owned by Averill Dawson. And Leroy bought it, and Jason was the mechanic that helped rebuild it to get it into the high performance mode, which means jumping up the engine to 400 horsepower and putting the new wings on it, the better wings. And Jason does a magnificent air show in it. He's a wonderful pilot. Young guy, going to really be somebody in the air show world as time goes by.
Yeah, speaking of Jim Leroy, that was kind of a great loss to the air show.
You know, they started out with the Masters of Disaster: Jimmy Franklin, Bobby Young, and Jim Leroy. They're all three dead. Two died in the Masters of Disaster act. Leroy died in the follow-up act. Just whenever you get multiple airplanes out there doing wild stuff, the odds on an accident go way up. My act is pretty stable. I do but basically the same act now for quite a long while, and everybody likes it. And they say, well, why don't you change it a lot? I said, well, why didn't Willie Nelson change his songs? When he sings Georgia on My Mind, it's still Georgia on My Mind, and when I do a flying air show, it's my air show.
Right.
And I've added a thing here or there and taken a thing out, and I maneuver a little bit, but basically the same thing. But when you start doing those wild acts, you can't predict what's going to happen sometimes. In the case of Jimmy and Bobby, Jimmy just turned the wrong way, and they were blind to each other. But biplanes are very hard to see out of anyhow, and they were blind to each other. The French connection ran together. I thought no two people would ever collide with each other. Those two, they were just perfection in the air.
Yeah, they were.
Yet they collided and died. And then the Red Burns had a mid-air collision down at Kissimmee, Florida, and God, they've been flying that formation forever, and still they ran together. Now, there have been a lot of mid-air collisions and air show acts. Now, Jim Leroy died in a maneuver that I think is a particularly bad maneuver for any pilot, and that's a low-altitude downline snap roll. And the reason is, a snap roll in any modern airplane, you're turning it better than 1 turn per second. And on a 45-degree angle, turning that fast, your ability to judge height that goes to 0. You cannot judge height. So you do it all on timing. If your angle is a little too steep, or if you make an extra turn, you've had it. And if you're going to do downline snap rolls, do them at an altitude where you have, 500 feet under you when you're finished. Jim was doing it with 0 under him when he finished. He hit the ground. And he might have survived it had it not burned. But I don't know how hard he hit. I don't know whether he's broken up or not. Some people get pretty busted up on impact.
I remember seeing photos of the plane after impact, and it didn't look just totally demolished.
No.
The gear was torn off. You could tell that it was a hard hit, but it just, I was actually kind of, so the airplane caught fire then?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that.
But it's I've known 4 pilots for sure that I can think of right now, just offhand, that died doing downline snap rolls.
Really?
Yeah. And 2 that died doing aileron rolls. 1 in a T-33, 1 in a T-6. And so
the T-6, was that the guy that
down in South Louisiana, Alexandria? Joe, what's his name?
I remember Dave, Tad, I think maybe some of the other T6 guys were down there, and when they saw him enter the roll.
There were issues. Yeah, I saw the video.
Yeah,
he didn't pitch up.
No,
but when he, instead of pushing the nose up, he pulled through into the ground. Well, actually went that way into the ground. But you know, there's rules. And the other maneuver that kills so many people is a plain old vanilla loop. Loop is the easiest maneuver to do in the world. Years ago, up at Arrow Country, our club had a show up there. When I was flying by decathlon, so that had to be pre-84, a long time ago. And I did a wheels in the grass to wheels in the grass loop. Wow. And when I landed, a friend of mine said, "Man, you did that loop awfully low." Well, yeah. He said, "Well, I did a loop in my pits the other day and lost 200 feet.
Really?
So you don't know how to do a loop. Let me tell you how to do a loop. Any idiot can pull it to here. And any idiot can decide at what speed he starts. Start fast, 20 miles an hour faster than recommended.
Yeah.
When you get it to here, from there over to inverted, shout out loud for the first few times, push it out, push it out, push it out. What do? You end up high and slow. Isn't that where you want to be when you're going to pull toward the ground? At that point, look at your altimeter. In a pits, if you don't have 900 feet, you roll out and go on as if nothing happened.
Yeah,
if you got 900 feet,
like half a Cubanate or an implement or something.
You need 600 feet to recover. So you got 300 feet available. You get down to the vertical, then as you start toward the ground, you're at 3 Gs maybe, and you can come right back down and kiss off the runway if you want to, because you're on 100% under control. Well, he came back a couple of weeks later and he says, "You know, I didn't know it was that easy." It's that easy. But we had a fellow from Oklahoma kill himself a couple of years ago in an extra doing a loop out in New Mexico. Well, he probably had high density altitude, and the airport was 4,000 feet above sea level to begin with.
Yeah.
And he didn't follow the rules on how you do a loop. You know, what I suggest to guys, and I'm one of the air show evaluator types, we all have to be evaluated annually by somebody. And my suggestion to any pilot, even if he's pretty experienced, is to strap on a knee board and go out, go to 3,000 feet, roll your airplane inverted, pull it through, record how much altitude loss you have. Bring it back up, change the speed, go from roughly 10 knots above stall to cruising speed. And remarkably, the amount of recovery altitude is almost the same.
Really?
Because you have so much G available at higher speed. You can pull.
Sure.
You can pull hard all the way.
Airplane, yeah.
If you're at near stalling speed, you got to let the airplane pick up speed before you can pull, or you'll snap it.
Yeah.
So you'd record that, and you go to 6,000 feet and do it. Go to 9,000 feet and do it. Now you know how much altitude you have to just hit the ground.
Wow.
Now add 300 feet to that.
Sure.
And that's the altitude you want to see when you're right here. It doesn't matter whether you're doing a reverse Cubanate and coming over, or doing a loop and coming over, or doing a split S and coming over. Anytime you're there and going to pull toward the ground, you need your recovery altitude plus 300 feet in a light aircraft every time. And people forget.
Sure.
A very good friend. He was a guard pilot flying F-16s. He was a captain for Delta. He flew yak in an air show. He was racing the jet truck. The truck didn't go. He thought something was wrong. He pulled up, did kind of a halfway loop, realized the jet truck was going, pulled back around, smacked into the ground at the starting line.
Oh.
Killed him. And did a loop. There's so many more I can name.
Yeah.
People flying jets, doing stupid things in jets. Just on and on. I mean, the people kill themselves practicing or in air shows, or just out messing around by not observing just some basic fundamentals. And one of those fundamentals is altitude and speed. The way you control your energy in an air show. I do a ground level air show. And if everything is not exactly right, I can't do it. You can't go do a ground level air show and mess up. You only get one chance. There's only 3 rules in air show flying. First rule is dive at the ground. Second rule, miss the ground. Third rule, any questions, see rule 2, miss the ground. That's all there is to it.
I remember when Charlie Hilliard had his accident, and I was watching the news and they interviewed you. and you said, in correlation to aviation, you said one of the best phrases, and I've remembered it always. And you said that with aviation, the penalty for failure is death.
Yeah. Yeah, so many. The first air show conference I went to, the International Council of Air Shows has an annual conference. The first one of those I went to in 1986 in Las Vegas. And of the pilots that were there in 1986, today half of them are gone.
Really?
Due to accidents, yeah. Well, that was 25 years ago, and about 15 years ago, we instituted the what's called the ACE program, Aerobatic Certification Evaluators, and that everybody has to be evaluated, and that to get a low-level card, instead of going straight to the FAA, which you can still do, but the FAA won't give you a card without coming through ICAS. You apply to ICAS, you get one of the ACE guys to come out and evaluate you, and your first step as a newbie is 800 feet. You can do air shows at 800 feet, and you have to do several of those, like 6 or 8 shows at that altitude, and then be evaluated again to see if you're suitable to come down to 500 feet.
Now, are you when you're being evaluated? Are you performing at air shows?
No, you cannot be evaluated at the air show except for a renewal at the same level. If you want to be renewed at 800 feet, that'll work. But if you want to come to 500, you got to demonstrate 500.
Okay.
Now, there's no rule about the altitude that you can fly in practice. If you have a box that's good from the surface up, you can have an 800-foot waiver, but you can still practice down to the surface.
Right.
But in order to do air show, you have to demonstrate to an ACE your capability at 500 feet. And then you do number shows at 500 feet, and you have to have the proof of that. And then they get evaluated and maybe go to 250 feet if the evaluator thinks you're competent to do that. And then there are quite a large number of shows required at 250 feet, and then 4 separate evaluations to come to surface. And those can be the same day with the same evaluator, but it has to be 4 flights. Land, first flight debrief, brief, do the second flight debrief, brief, do the third flight debrief, brief, do the fourth flight debrief. And at that point, if the guy's willing to put his neck on the line, he sign you off for service. And then that goes back to ICAS and then to the FSDO, and the FSDO decides whether to, looking at their records on you, whether you maybe you're messed up a number of times before, and they really don't want to give you that low altitude waiver. Even though you seem to have passed all the hoops, they can still decide no, although they, to my knowledge, they have never done that. They can if they wanted to.
Right.
So eventually the certificate you get is from the FAA. It's not from ICAS. But you've had to run through the ICAS gauntlet to get it. And that's worked pretty well. But, when guys like Charlie Hillard, Jimmy Franklin, Bobby Young, and Jim Leroy get killed, what are we doing wrong here, folks? And I don't think anyone quite knows the answer. And I do know the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels have virtually eliminated fatal crashes. In their first 40 years of operation, each one killed 20, 21 pilots. And since that time, there have been a few. The Blues lost one at Valdosta, Georgia in 2000, and then they lost number 6 more recently, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, due to G-lock.
Right.
And the Thunderbirds, I don't think they've lost anybody since they've had the F-16s.
They came close.
Yeah.
They came close.
That was the incredible bailout picture.
Yes. Yes. I actually met the commander on the team back then. He came over to the Kavanaugh Museum to speak at one of the meetings. And the guy just, didn't do his altitude calculation right.
The problem they had,
altitude.
They did not set their altimeters to 0.
I know, they always set them to field elevation.
Yes.
And he had got.
And then they had to calculate all these numbers.
And they're doing air shows at different elevations all the time.
Yeah.
So they go, they came from this other elevation, and that number was still stuck in his head.
That's just a mistake,
It was.
But they set to 0 now.
You know what's funny though? He brought a bunch of video of that ejection, and the camera is on the right hand side of the glare shield, so it's looking to you can see his right side. You can barely see his left arm. Now the 16 is the side control stick.
Yeah.
Okay, but he goes, now watch it. I'm gonna not say anything. I'm gonna show this thing, and then boom, jet crashes, it's all static. He goes, now let me back up. He goes, watch him reach for the handle 3 times. I know, but none of us caught it. And sure as hell, you see it go 1, 2, 3, bam, then he's out. And he goes, once we got the tape, we debriefed and said, well, why did you reach for it 3 times? He goes, well, the first time he goes, I'm not going to make this. And he reached for the handle. And he goes, no, I'm not going to lose this jet.
Indecision.
He goes, put it back on the throttle. Pump
That's
up
a
the throttle.
common problem.
And then
although I've talked to a lot of F-16 guys, said that he continued pulling, he'd have made it.
Really?
As he caught the ground cushion, caught the.
Wow.
So I don't know. I did see.
You can see those slats, those leading edge slats, just cranking down. And you could tell by his strain that he was doing everything.
There's some think he would have made it if he continued on, but who knows? I was watching a show, Thunderbird show at Daytona one year, and a few years ago, and the diamond formation was gone that way, and the solos were not part of the act, but this solo came diving down, and I thought, boy, he's steep, and everybody's looking that way, but I'm looking this way, oh, he's steep. And I had said the magic OS words, and I knew he was going to hit, and he disappeared at this angle behind the trees.
Oh, gosh.
Pine trees, which are, 40, 50 feet tall. He disappeared behind them. And about 150 yards down, he came up, and this huge cloud of red dirt came up. And
from the...
he was so close. So close, man. He was in a clearing beside the trees, but he was just the air cushion, the ground effect cushion saved him. He would have been a ball of fire sliding down in the trees.
Unbelievable.
That was really close. Really close. Next day I asked one of the Thunderbird guys, that guy nearly hit the ground over there. Oh yeah.
Really?
Yeah. He did. Didn't intend to do that.
When was that?
10 years ago maybe.
Oh wow.
I don't know.
Okay.
Then there's the guy, the Marine Colonel out at El Toro. When the Blues first got the F-18, so that would have been 86, 87 time frame, and they were at El Toro for a show, and at the cocktail party Friday night, they always have a big party for the Blues, and this colonel's wife was quite drunk, and she came up to the Blues guys and said, my husband knows how to fly an F-18, you guys don't know how. He says, you guys not getting anything out of their airplane like it'll do. Next day, the colonel put on a show, and he impacted the ground at that angle, slapped down, it slid 2,000 feet, a huge cloud of dust.
I've seen that.
And didn't burn.
Yeah.
But it broke many of his face bones, body bones. He had 100 breaks, and they pulled him out of there like a rag doll, and he was months in recovery, but he did recover from it.
Wow.
And he blamed it on the airplane. He didn't leave enough room at the bottom.
No.
Another guy.
Did you see his high angle of attack?
Oh, man.
And his rate of descent.
He
when
ain't
his
gonna
tail
make
hit, it just the nose followed.
Yeah,
It just smacked him right down. Yeah. Wow.
A guy flying a MiG-17 in a show, he came to ICAS, and he had brushed the ground with the MiG, bounced off the ground with the MiG, and landed it successfully, pulling out of a loop. Almost another loop statistic. But he explained what happened there. And he said that when he takes off, he does a duster turn after takeoff, and he has 15 degrees of flaps or something like that in order to make it through that turn. And then when he comes back to do the loop, he generally pulls the flaps up. But he apparently forgot the flaps, noticed he was a little slow, went over the top of the loop, and hit the ground on the way out. And he said, I normally leave 50 foot of clearance. And I'm sitting there thinking, everybody's sucking all this up. What an idiot. 50 feet in a jet doesn't mean anything. Yeah. There's no such thing as 50 feet in a jet in a maneuver like that. Now, if he had 500 feet as a safety factor, but feathered it all the way back down to the ground,
right,
like I described the loop, no problem. But he went over the top, too slow, too low, and he kept going. He's a fool. It's amazing how many people let their macho get in front of their good sense. It's just amazing.
That can happen sometimes.
I try to avoid that. I do. I'm still here, you know.
I've known you for several years, and you've always been one of the more humble characters I've ever met.
And I'm 75 years old and still doing it,
and still doing our show. That's exactly right. Exactly right.
I still fly like a teenager. In Pensacola 5 years ago, I just turned 70, or was going to turn 70 a month later. And we had dinner with the announcer, Pat Ford, who's a very good friend for a long time, known him forever. And and we were having dinner and we were talking about things, and my age came up somehow in the conversation. Well, the next day at the air show, as I'm doing my routine, he's announcing that I'm 70 years old. And he said when he took his break, a guy came up to him and said, "You said that guy's 70 years old?" I said, "Yeah." "How do you know that?" "Well, he told me." Flies like a goddamn teenager. Yes! My job, scare everybody on the airport, but not me.
Right.
If I scare me, I've messed up big time. And there was one other story, a doctor in an air show up in the East Coast somewhere, flying a French Cap 32, which is a wonderful airplane, banged it on the ground. And he had a French coach. Being a French airplane, all the guy from France was coaching him. And the French coach came to the ICAST meeting, and he got up in front of all the pilots just to say what happened. And he's describing all this involved stuff, and he's got a terrible language problem, and nobody can understand what he's saying. Finally, the moderator said, "Could you just sum it up in a few words?" He says, "He very too much the fucking up." And I said, "You know, I have finally heard the bottom line truth on most aviation accidents."
That is
classic.
Perfect.
That's
classic. Just classic.
And it describes it. It describes it completely. Just like they say, that the airline crashes, they have the recorder, and in 90% of the cases, the last words are "oh shit."
Yeah, watch
but
this.
In the case of Texas pilots, it's "hey, watch this."
Now, looking through your photos, you got to fly with the Blue Angels in both the A4 and the F-18.
Yeah, I got a ride in each, and that was it was a flight suit 5 sizes too small, a helmet 5 sizes too small, belts that didn't reach to my size, and no vertical clearance. And I remember being that A4 and said, "You know, am I having fun or not?" And this giant guy, line guy, I couldn't get the belts fastened. This giant, looked like a Mr. Universe Weight Watcher, came up and he grabbed those belts and got them closed. And I couldn't breathe. The flight suit had me by the crotch, and I was being crushed by this tiny little helmet because they have quite a large head, and their helmet was designed for little people, I guess. But so here I am. I can't breathe. My head's cramped. I'm feeling bad. So we went out and played for 45 minutes, I guess. Hollywood Anderson, he just retired as a 2-star, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, Hollywood was great. David Anderson. At any rate, then the F-18 was a year or two later. This was right at the transition point between the two airplanes. And I had similar difficulty getting the F-18, and everything was kind of crowded. And did about 45 minutes in that and had a good time. You know, they don't wear G suits.
Right.
And we were out doing 6.5 G continuous 360s and Immelmans and loops and things. And everybody was kind of amazed that a fat guy, older fat guy, could sustain that many G's and stay awake. And the most exciting thing we did, though.
But you'd been doing acro for a while by then.
Oh yeah, sure.
So G's were no stranger to you. Yeah.
But 6.5 continuous. You know, in my airplane, in this show I did just this last weekend, I'm pulling 8 Gs. No big deal. It lasts for 3 seconds, 4 seconds. In that jet, it just with burner on, it just goes on and on and on. You're holding 6.5 Gs, and of course the nose is barely moving at 6.5 Gs. You know, it takes you a long time to make a 360.
Right.
And I was grunting hard, man. I was grunting hard, and you could hardly breathe, hardly talk.
Right?
It's an awful experience, but it's supposed to be fun, right?
Yeah.
But the neat thing we did, we dropped down to about 500 feet, 400 feet, 300 feet, I don't know, over the water, a half mile off the coastline, and we were running along at Mach 0.6. And he says, okay, go to full burner, but come out when you hit 0.95 or we'll break windows. And so I popped it into full burner, and I'll tell you what, you're pressed back in that seat with an incredible acceleration. And we got to 9.5 and I pulled it and we went a little above 9.6, 9.7. And it was in a matter of seconds. It was no delay at all.
Really?
What a wonderful airplane. The Crusader had a similar thrust to weight ratio as the F-18. Not a whole lot different, but God, I hadn't flown a Crusader for, at that point, 30 years, I guess, 35 years, whatever, a long time.
Wow.
And didn't quite go supersonic. They're not allowed to do supersonic. So.
Really? Why not?
It's just, you can't do it anywhere except in very limited areas.
Oh,
It's
because
highly
of populated
restricted.
areas.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
highly restricted.
right.
There may be some part out to sea that you can do it, but
Yes.
not in close to the coastline. We were working, they have a practice box just south of the coastline there, just west of Pensacola, that they practice in, if they're not practicing over the airport. Once they get going, good, they practice over the airport, but they do two-plane and whatnot out at El Centro, and then some warm-up work they do. They have a practice area, and they take a lot of rides in the number 7 ships, so they have to have a place to play.
Yeah.
Of course, we play in a similar area down there with the light airplanes where we take rides. It's a lot of fun to take rides down there. It's so beautiful. The beach line is absolutely white, and the water is beautiful green, and the contrast is wonderful. You see some pictures of that.
Yeah.
What a wonderful time. We always have to take the riders in the afternoon after the blues. Well, that time of year in November, the sun sets at 5 o'clock, so you got between 4 and 5 o'clock to cram in rides because the airplane is not certified for post-sunset flying. And so we ram them through as hard as we can and get them out and do as much as they want to do. Just go south onto the beach and down a little ways and start doing acro with them. And have 4 or 5 airplanes out there at one time doing different things and trying to stay clear of each other.
Right.
Exciting time, yeah. It's really a lot of fun. I love going down there. I was at Kingsville maybe 2.5 weeks ago, I guess, and I love going down to South Texas. I have a lot of family down there, and of course went through advanced training down there. And I didn't do Kingsville, but I did Corpus. But every year the show rotates now. 1 year it's in Kingsville, 1 year it's in Corpus. Goes back and forth. And back when I first started doing shows down there, they do one day, they do Friday and Saturday at Mainside, they do Sunday at Kingsville. But they quit doing it that way. Now they rotate up because so much prep is required. The same amount of preparation for a show is required for 1 day as 3 days.
Right.
So do it one place for 3 days and give the other guys a break, and then transfer it, and it works really well. And we've been blessed with pretty good weather. Back early in my career down there, the weather was real stinky, and in fact that day the air boss was in the tower. When I took off, the wind was blowing 30 knots and it was light rain and about 800-foot ceiling. I did my snap roll on takeoff and just scared the fool out of me. He thought I'd lost it in the wind. He looked up and saw me anyway, I was doing my show. I pulled up to do a hammerhead and I went about 400 up into the clouds, and uh-oh, this is no good. And I'll tell him I was behind the cloud because it's against the rules to go in the clouds. So I came back out of the clouds, back down, and well, I'm not going to do that again. I did a loop. Well, I went into the soup on the loop too. So I was really feeling paranoid and got back down. Jerry Garrison, the FAA monitor for the show, regrettably killed in a motorcycle accident after that, a while after that. But here he comes running out from the crowd line waving his clipboard at me. I thought, oh man, I'm going to get a violation. And I cracked the canopy open. He's real gruff guy. What was the ceiling up there? I said, about 1,000 feet, Jerry. He says, great, the Blue Angels can fly.
Oh, that's funny.
I thought I'd been had. Oh man, he was a great guy. I took him to dinner that night, and a bunch of us did, and we had a lot of fun with him. he was legendary down there, though. He was really hard to deal with, but we got to know him real well, and he treated us like we were gold.
Really?
And, there's another guy down there now that's in a similar mode. He just gives everybody royal hell, but he likes me, and we just get along fine. And he confides in me about what other people are doing. I don't want to hear it, It's not my problem. Although there've been times. There was one pilot that we had to take action on. Well, I've actually had to take action on several, but this one guy, I was at the Galveston Air Show, and he was flying little pits, and it's a non-remarkable show. The most remarkable thing he did was land. It was always fun to watch him land because he's going to go all over the place. But he would come across at 600 feet and do a snap roll, and then do a snap roll. And this one day, I didn't want to watch him because I didn't know he was going to kill himself, and I'd gone back behind the flight line quite a ways. But it's coming out. Here he's doing the snap roll, and he gets to about here, and then he pulls through right at the crowd. And he came right over the crowd about 10 feet and out. And for whatever reason, the FAA guy that was there didn't see it. Well, afterwards he came and said, I guess you saw that, right? I said, yeah, I did. I did see it. That was bad. He said, well, what am I going to do? I mean, how do you do a snap roll, right? You yank back on the stick and you stomp on the rudder. And I said, well, basically, yeah. He said, well, I did that, but I'd had some kids in the airplane, and there was a shoe stuck in the rudder, and I couldn't get full rudder. And I got over here, what else could I do? I said, well, you could roll out. You could roll out. He pulled through, did a split S from about 600 feet and barely made it. I thought he was going to hit the ground.
Yeah.
I gave the great OS signal.
Yeah.
He's not going to make it.
Yeah.
He came zooming back up over the crowd, and we were at Corpus Christi then a couple of weeks later, and Chuck Lisher had an event with him down at Brownsville, and Ian Groom was there, and Chuck and Ian, I'm both deceased now, both killed in airplanes. Chuck in the little BD-5 jet, and Ian in a Sukhoi. But at any rate, we got together and went to the FAA. He said, look, here's a guy with a problem. He should not be doing air shows. He was an older guy, 70 at the time. I'm fine when to talk. He had any business flying air shows. In fact, you need to watch, because we think he should be pulled from, his air show ticket should be pulled. And we're all three aces, and it's our responsibility to pay attention.
Right.
Well, he watched, he spun out of a hammerhead turn. He literally spun out, and we thought he was going to hit the ground doing that. And he got that recovered, and finally when he landed, his landing was so bad the tower actually called him and said, do you need assistance?
Really?
The airplane going every which way.
Wow.
They pulled his ticket. Well, then he called a friend of mine and said he was going to commit suicide over that. He had nothing left to live for.
Really?
My friend was laying the guilt trip on me. I says, hey, I don't feel guilty. If he wants to kill himself, that's okay.
Just not in front of
But
thousands.
not kill a bunch of people out there in the stands, flying into the stands. That's my job, to keep him out of the stands. If he wants to kill himself, I regret it. I'll feel bad about it, but I'm not going to feel a conscience problem on it. Did what had to be done. So yeah, there's a lot of odd things happens at air shows. Sean Tucker and I intervened in a guy down in Daytona one year and got him stopped. I mean, he was stopped in the middle of the show, told him to land. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Massively incompetent. Demonstrating a new airplane down there, and I don't know how he ever got a ticket to do low altitude. I had another event when we got to FINA pits. We were doing a show for the FINA people at a little airport east of Dallas, private airport, and I'd gotten the waiver papers all done and everything, and the FAA guy called me up and said, we've added this fellow to your waiver. And I said, I don't want him on my waiver. He's going to kill himself, and I don't want him to kill himself on my waiver. I said, either you take him off and tell him you're taking him off, or I'll cancel it. We won't do a show. So they took him off. Well, he showed up at the show, little pits, and he had a little red flight suit and everything, and Delmo Johnson and I both flew for FINA and showing off 2 airplanes. And when we got ready to leave, the FINA guy's on the microphone. He says, okay, so-and-so is getting ready to take off. Everybody watch. He said he'd do a little something on takeoff. And I said, oh no, and I start running for the radio, and I'm way too far away. He takes off, he pulls up, he does an aileron roll this way, scoops out, hits the ground, flips over in a huge cloud of dust. I said, if he didn't kill himself, I'm going to go down there and kill him. We got down there, and his head had hit the windshield on that pit, and it scalped him. Blood everywhere, and he was unconscious. And there was a Marine. It didn't burn. If it burned, he'd been dead. There was a Marine medic there, and he opened up, got him out, got him clear of the airplane, and a doctor flying over in an RV saw the crowd in the airplane, landed. He wouldn't touch the guy, but he was telling this medic what to look for. You know, is his eyes dilated, what's his pulse, what's his respiration, etc. In the meanwhile, care flights come in, and they took him over to Methodist.
Wow.
And they did 250 stitches in his scalp and close him up. They did a carotid ream job, and they did his prostate while they had him there. He was there for about 6 weeks.
Oh my God!
Getting a full overhaul. He did not get his ticket back, and I told the FAA
Probably for a good reason.
Yeah, don't give him his ticket back. Period. Be a mistake.
Out of all your flying career, what's what's the most important thing that you've taken out of it? What's the most influential, beneficial thing that you've ever gotten out of aviation?
Well, first of all, aviation is a wonderful activity. Dallas would not exist without aviation and air conditioning. It's those two things that make Dallas work.
Right.
And so aviation is a big part of my life. I've been on the board at DFW Airport for 12 years, 3 different 4-year periods, and chairman for 2 years. I've got the museum I'm president of, or was president of, down at Love Field for 20 years, and involved in the aviation collection at UTD. I think aviation is one of the great features of modern society. And given the number of 1,400 747s that have been built, and all the 380s that have been built, and all of the 737s, thousands and thousands of those, and now the 320s, and it's all the different aircraft. Aviation is a lifestyle for Americans. And having people involved in it to me is very important. And I see my role, the thing I get most out of it, is introducing and motivating, inspiring young people to think the way I thought when I was a kid, that, hey, I want to do that. I want to do that. That's what the museum does. That's what I do at air shows. I put kids in the airplane. I had just this past week at Burnett, a friend of mine was there, flew within the reserves, and his daughter was there, and his grandson was there, maybe 7 years old. I put him in the airplane, and he sat there, moved the controls, got out. Well, he said, that's all he could talk about since the air show, is that he sat in a plane that flew in the air show.
Oh,
and
wow.
It's going to change his life. The quick story, the same little air show for FINA that we had the guy crash in, while I was flying, a lady and her son were driving by on the little country road and stopped, and then came in and asked if they could see the airplane, and they directed them to me, and I put the young man, 7 years old, put him in the cockpit of the pits, and he sat there and moved the controls and everything, and they left. And I don't know their names to this day, but about 4 years ago, in a supermarket, one of our museum volunteers with all his stuff on was in the checkout line. Lady says, you work at Frontiers of Flight? Yeah, volunteer. You know Jan Collmer, of course. Tell him the story. And she related the same story and said, I want Jan to know that my son, once he sat in that airplane, that's all he could think about was aviation. And in May, he graduates from the Air Force Academy.
Wow.
Now, that's the way it works. Mm-hmm. I was over at Alliance one day, and a young man came up, Air Force lieutenant, tapped me on the shoulder, said, you remember me? Maybe not. He said, well, 2 years ago, I was a senior in North Texas, and I volunteered to work at the air show, and you took some people riding, and I was one of the lucky ones that got a ride. And after that ride, that's all I could think about. And I graduated in that January following the October show and joined the Air Force, and that's my F-16 right over there.
I'll be darned.
So that's the way it works. And you can have so much influence.
Wow.
Anything we do, we're an example of somebody. No matter what you're doing, somebody is paying attention.
Yeah.
And so you want to be a good example that people can take a positive thing from. And the example that I've tried so hard to present is aviation. It's a good thing. It involves technology. It involves higher level thinking. It requires a lot of personal discipline. You have to lead a clean life, straight life, and you have to be dedicated. You don't get a pilot's license without intense dedication just to get a civilian private. And if you go on to the higher level things, it's just an incredible amount of attention has to be paid to be an airline pilot, to be a military pilot, to fly care flight, to do whatever it is, or to work on them, or to fuel them, or to do whatever, design them, build them. All these different things require people early in life to make a decision about what their life is going to be like. A straight, be well educated, see higher education. You look at most pilots, they have college degrees. I don't, certainly not all of them, but most do. And if you look at military pilots, they virtually all do. And many advanced degrees. One young man from Dallas, Pat Walsh, Jesuit graduate, in the 70s, is now 4-star admiral in charge of the U.S. Pacific Fleet.
Wow.
More than half the world under his command. And he went to an air show when he was 12 years old out at Navy Dallas and saw the Blue Angels and said, I want to do that. Well, he became a Blue Angel. He was 3 years a Blue Angel, flying A4s 1 year and 2 years F-18 at that crossover point. And he's continued on. He got a PhD at Tufts while he was in the Navy in international, particularly Middle Eastern dealings. He was a CAG. He flew Combat and Desert Storm. He flew South Watch over Iraq as a CAG. I flew the F-18, the F-14. He was in the White House for a year as White House Fellow.
Oh, wow.
He spent 2 years at helping straighten out some problems at the Naval Academy. And now he is at the top of his game and is probably one of the candidates for Chief of Naval Operations in a couple of years.
Wow.
So
Amazing.
his brother, I influenced his younger brother, who's first officer for American Airlines, took him flying when he was a kid, and talked aviation to Pat. I wasn't flying when he went to the Naval Academy, but talked aviation, and with his father, I've known his father forever. And his younger brother went into the Navy and did 12 years in the Navy and now flies for American. And I take him to air shows with me and ride him around in the pits, and that's the way it works. And that's the gift we all have to give. You're doing it with a video, which is a great thing. I do it with my airplane, but we're going to bring people something and we're not going to influence everybody, but there's that one guy or 2 guys or 10 guys that you're going to have an influence on.
Exactly.
And they're going to say, wait a minute, why aren't I doing something like this?
This is cool.
That's what it's all about.
Just getting to impact someone's life.
You do.
We
all do, and you can't help. You can either be a positive effect or a negative one.
Exactly.
You can be either one. And
right.
These poor kids in South Dallas that grew up with dope dealers as their role models, I feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
And that's why our museum is situated at Love Field, right in the middle of DISD, so that some of those kids maybe get a little inspiration and change their life, because it's so important that they get inspiration.
Yeah.
Their role models that they have to follow, a lot of them are not very good.
Right.
Not very good at all. The gangs, the dope dealers, etc. Not good inspiration. Wrong track. We'd like to get them over to the right track.
How much longer do you think you're going to fly shows?
Till God says I can.
Good answer.
And God is Dr. Silverman in the FAA office in Oklahoma City.
Right.
That's God.
Right.
I had 4 stents put into my coronary arteries almost 4 years ago now, and so I have to go through a pretty intense battery of testing every year to keep my license.
Wow.
And so at some point, coronary artery disease doesn't go away. You can mitigate it. And before you got here, I was out walking my daily walk, and I've lost some weight, not enough. I watch my diet, do my pills, do my vitamins, and I don't know, I'm hoping to go to 85. Heck, that's just 10 years. I think I can do 10 more years.
Yeah.
I have a problem though, my hangar lease runs out at 84. And so we're renegotiating now to extend the lease.
1 more year?
No, for 10 more years.
Oh, okay. I get you.
Who knows? It may be 94. It's
You never
possible.
know.
We're not very likely, but no, I enjoy every minute of it.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you in Europe for a long time.
Yeah, well, I hope so. One way or another, I'll be supporting aviation and a bunch of other things. So, I enjoy photography and art, music and fishing, and collecting a variety of things, artifacts, and seashells of all things, and fossils. I have a lot of interests, and they go in all directions, and I'm never bored. never bored. That's a good thing. A lot of people I know, in fact, what I have in mind right now, a little older than I, he has nothing to do. And he sits around all day and kind of mopes. That's bad.
Yeah.
Need to have something to do. I've also been working with DFW on the visitor. Have you been to that?
No.
I lobbied for one back 20 years ago on the southeast corner of the airport, Founders Plaza, and got that built and installed.
Oh, is that where you could park and watch the jets coming in?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well,
I've been out there.
when they did the perimeter road, they knocked that out, but they gave us $2.8 million while I was chairman. Actually, they gave us $2.8 million to build another one, and it's up on the Grapevine side now. It's just off of 121 Texan Trail, which is the next exit from the main entrance, north entrance to the airport. And you turn into the airport, it goes right down, and it's built up. We built a berm to put it on, and you look right over the fences and everything, and you look at UPS over here, and you look at Terminal D over here, and you look at the end of the runway over here, and the jets come very close. Beautiful spot, and it's got the radio and the compass and picnic tables and covers and parking for 100 cars.
Wow.
It's just fantastic. Landscaped well. Got the old beacon there. You know, beacons aren't required anymore at airports.
Really?
Yeah, not required. But we have the old beacon there as sort of a historic monument.